Hey guys, it's HoppingHammy and thank you for joining me on another video. Today I wanted to first show you the nook in this room where I will be setting up my DIY hamster cage in. So I always had pictured in my head that I wanted to hang vines behind the cage, and I just happened to have a bunch of fake ivy vines sitting around in a storage tub, so I pulled them out and I wanted to get those hung up before I started building the cage, since there would be no room for a ladder to go once the cage is all set up. Here's how the space looks with the vines hanging, and I even hung some from the ceiling to lend to the outdoor feel. In future, I have a ton of ideas on how I would like to decorate my hamster room to feel like an outdoor forest with a giant tree and cozy hanging lights, some little red mushrooms, and maybe forest wall mural or something, but for the time being, this is how this area will remain. Okay, so now we will get into building the cage, and as a brief reminder, this cage was already designed and built one time in past, so most of the hard work such as the measuring, cutting, the drilling out, the screw holes, all of that was already done this time around. So this time I just had to pull the cage sections and the hardware supplies out of storage and put it back together. For anyone wondering or wanting to build a similar enclosure, the cage base measures in at 94.5 inches long by 40 inches wide. For the cage back piece, the measurements are 94.5 inches long by 24 inches high, and this piece sets behind the cage base on the floor. The two cage side pieces measure 40 inches long by 24 inches high, and these set on the outside of the cage base. All of my wood cage pieces are 3/4 inch thick melamine wood, and I had a real problem getting these cut at Home Depot because they said it damages their saw or something and it causes the melamine laminate to chip, and Lowe's wouldn't cut it at all for me. But thankfully I found one Home Depot location that was willing to cut the wood for me after a lot of convincing and persuading on my part, because honestly I had no other option to be able to cut it and to make this cage. I also wanted to note that because the melamine laminate edges chip pretty badly when they're cut, you definitely don't want those rough, chipped edges accessible for your hamster to chew on, because the laminate glue is said to be toxic when I had researched it way back in the day. So I will show you how to cover those rough edges later on if you keep watching in this video. Once the back and sides were all screwed in together, this is what it looked like. Next, I am adding these very heavy-duty solid steel shelf brackets. You can see how thick that they are, and the reason for this is because I wanted to put my 110-gallon tank on the top and to make sure it was completely secure. You absolutely do not want to go cheap on these pieces if you plan to put anything heavy on a top shelf, because the risk of glass tanks falling onto a hamster below would be the worst possible thing to happen. You'll also see later on that there is a PVC pipe stabilizing beam added as a middle support to further help with holding the weight load. After having this tank set up for multiple years in past, I can safely say the shelf has no issues holding the weight and no problem with sagging over time. I also wanted to mention that this shelf is 2 pieces of melamine wood that have been screwed together to form one thick shelf because I didn't want to put just one piece. I didn't trust that it would be strong enough to hold it, so there are 2 pieces for this shelf. I do have a past video that sort of shows how I pieced these tanks together to form one big tank. It's fairly dangerous and I definitely do not recommend anyone do it unless you have a ton of patience and are willing to potentially crack and ruin your aquarium tank in the process. Thankfully that didn't happen for me though. But anyways, that's what those look like. I will not be connecting this tank for Sprocket, but I will save it for a possible dwarf hamster to live in future. Next, I wanted to work on putting the aluminum angle bars along the inside of the cage space, and this is to protect the edges so that the hamster can't chew or have access to the melamine wood laminate. I highly recommend putting something like this for protection. Even though it takes additional time and is an additional cost, it has given me so much peace of mind to have all of the edges sealed and protected. I'm using 100% silicone with no mold inhibitors or any other added chemicals to seal the edges of the aluminum bars to the wood. Be warned, this stuff is pretty stinky and smells like a very strong vinegar, so you will need adequate ventilation when you do this. You also want to make sure the silicone cures and dries for at least 24 to 36 hours before you put bedding or anything else in the cage. For the last step, I have 2 separate pieces of plexiglass that are joined together in the middle with 2 aluminum flat bars, one on each side, and those have been siliconed to the plexiglass. I chose 1/4 inch thick plexiglass because anything thinner than that would bow out in the middle for a cage this size, and with the weight of the bedding and large wooden items pressing against the front, I didn't want to have any issues with the acrylic glass bowing or popping out. I also would not suggest at all that anyone build a cage this size using regular glass because that would not only be heavy and dangerous, it's extremely risky in terms of cracking. Acrylic plexiglass doesn't shatter or crack like regular glass does, so you don't have to worry about that, and in my opinion, the safety is well worth spending the extra money to get the acrylic versus regular glass. For the edges, I put these plastic corner guards on because I have a tendency to accidentally kick the cage when I walk near it, so this protects the edges and it also gives a nice finish. Once the cage was built and the silicone had fully cured and dried, the final step I needed to complete was to put up these LED light strips underneath the top shelf, and I really like using these lights for dim lighting when I watch the hamster at nighttime. So here is what the final setup looks like, and in my next video I can finally start to set up and decorate for the cage theme I've chosen for Sprocket, and I'm so excited to share that video because quite a lot of people have asked for a video showing how I design cage themes from start to finish, so that's what the next video will be all about. It's gonna be a big video to have to put together, but it'll be fun. I thank you so much if you made it to the end of this video, and I apologize if any of my instructions were confusing, but I'm totally not a DIY instructional type of person, and I struggle with making that type of content, so if you have any other questions that weren't explained clearly enough, feel free to leave them below and I will do my best to answer. I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. Thank you for all of the lovely comments that you left on my previous videos welcoming Sprocket, and I'll see you again very soon. Bye!